Hello and welcome to another episode of the Petey Performance Podcast. Solo episode for you guys today, and it is episode 150. I didn't probably think that I was going to get this far with the podcast when I first put word to camera or started the podcast. I suppose there's not really an appropriate phrase there, I guess, because you don't put pen to paper on a podcast. But when I started off, I probably didn't think I was going to get this far, and here we are. And as I've spoken about on the podcast before, I think I've gained a lot from the process of podcasting, from putting my thoughts out into the world, from the process of condensing my thoughts and talking through, I suppose, my rationale for why I do things different ways. I've become more open, more confident as a result. I've obviously become a much better speaker as a result. I've met an incredible amount of really high caliber athletes, coaches, practitioners. I've learned so much through this process, and yeah, it's a bit surreal to get to 150. I think other people would probably think, wow, 150 podcasts, that's amazing. And I guess it is something to be proud of. As David Gray has said to me in the past, having that many podcast episodes, that podcast is there. Like, it's not going away. People will continue to find you. Now, I do feel like sometimes you have to stay posting to stay relevant, but I probably have succumbed to the pressures of having to, or wanting to, and putting pressure on myself to continually create long form content in order to offer out my thoughts and offer out information to people out there to try to attract people into potentially working with me, as well as because I've got so much back from the podcast, both personally and professionally, I probably put pressure on myself to do it because, like anything, and it's the way that you become a workaholic, you get the reward initially, so then you think if you keep working and keep doing more, you'll continue to get more rewards, but potentially that is not the case. It was only when Owen McCabe from the Backdoor Cut Podcast, he said last week, I think we had Sarah Rowe on the podcast last week, and we had her in, and she asked me, how long have I been doing it? And I said, a few years. And Owen was like, yeah, you've probably done over 200 podcasts, haven't you? And I was like, no, I haven't. I'm coming up to 150. And then I said, oh, well, we're almost at 25 for the Backdoor Cut. And then I've been guests on a couple, I suppose. Yeah, I probably have done close to 200, actually. That's a lot of podcasting. That's a lot of hours of my life, which is mental, but it's a good mental, I suppose. I've got a lot back out of it. So I've given you guys a bit of an update today on the podcast. And it wasn't meant to be a solo episode 150, but the way things have transpired, it's turned into one. So I did want to come on and still try to provide some value for you guys, but also it's probably more appropriate for me to mark this occasion of episode 150 by myself, because initially when I started the podcast, I wasn't comfortable. I wasn't as comfortable, let's say, doing the solo episodes. I didn't feel confident that I could provide value. I think I've probably got more back out of the solo episodes than the guest episodes, and that's not a knock on the guest episodes. It's just, in terms of challenging me, the solo episodes definitely challenge me more. They've definitely improved my ability to communicate. They've definitely allowed me to be more introspective, to examine myself and why I do things the way I do, slightly differently. They've brought about an increased amount of self-awareness, I would say, as well, which has been fantastic. I've also went really in-depth into very specific topics, and as a result of that process, I think I've learned a lot more about those topics, because if you can teach something well, then you understand it, essentially. And I've got to put myself out there more, which is obviously a hard thing to do initially, and a hard thing to navigate, and a hard thing to have the confidence to do. But now it's just easy. Like episode 149, I set out my story, my mission, my vision, and my values, and I probably wasn't challenged very much to do that, even though I was talking about quite delicate topics. But I had spoken about those topics on the podcast before, and I'd spoken about them with multiple different people in conversations with guests and in conversations on other podcasts. So I didn't really have that much trouble articulating my feelings because I had done so. And then it only became apparent that a lot of people haven't been here for the whole journey. So that was the first time that a lot of them had heard me tell my story. And I got a lot of messages from people that I did not expect around just wishing me well and saying that I was brave to put it out there and that it was powerful and that it will help a lot of people. And when I put it out there initially, the first podcast that I spoke about my depression and spoke about my mental health issues, I was trying to overcome the guilt that I was feeling around those issues and just be open and let people know. And then I was also had an active and I had a focus or a conscious focus on trying to help other people and let other people know that it's not all sunshine and rainbows and other people do go through stuff and you can get through it. And I was simultaneously probably talking to my audience, but also talking to myself and giving myself a little pep talk. But this time around, it was very easy to do, and that wouldn't have happened without the podcasting. Now, putting out the post, because that was what my editor, shout out Amy, had suggested as a reel for the podcast, and we had a few to choose from, that was the best one. And I was reluctant to put that one out because the guilt that I feel now is around talking about my story too much. Because I don't want to become known as the guy that grows his personal brand through only speaking about his past and potentially his mental health issues. I want to be the guy that has overcome them, and that's part of my story, but it's not the whole thing. It's driven me on to be better as a person, as a human being, and as a coach. And it's given me some knowledge into the area and some valuable life experience, but it's not the whole picture. So I'm conscious I don't want this to become the whole purpose for the podcast or the whole conversation topic for the podcast, because I know people tune in for different reasons. So there was a bit of guilt around talking about that, and a couple of my friends actually reined me in regards to that because they messaged me as well to say it was powerful. And I said, yeah, felt a bit guilty, or I was a bit on edge about putting it out, and they were like, why would you feel that way? It is helping people. Like, it's a very difficult thing to do. And I felt guilt then because it actually wasn't that difficult for me to go and talk about it because I had the experience of doing it previously. But that's just something you have to live by or live with, I suppose. And it's something that probably gets easier with time. But yeah, I was blown away by the reception to that. So it is good to, I suppose, reflect on that now in episode 150, and to also have this opportunity to thank you guys for the well wishes. And yeah, there's been a few people have said it to me in person as well, and we've had some powerful conversations, and we're opening a dialogue that's going to be valuable to that individual person and is going to help that individual person and show them they're not alone. So that's important, I suppose, and it's definitely worthwhile. So I'm glad I've been of some use putting the podcast out, and some people have resonated with, which is awesome. I've just finished as well. I was going to not speak on this, but I've had a mad day so far today. The laptop was overheating earlier on. It was getting a good see into a lot of work on the table, which is fantastic. And it has been that way since I got back to Ireland, really, which has been great. And it's always great to be busy, and it's always great to have the business. But it's something I probably need to focus more on, is being a little bit more organized and structured. And we're getting to that stage as a business where I need to focus on what's going to push business forward a little bit more, and do I need to delegate a little bit more effectively? Can I only do so much? Can I not do absolutely everything for everybody all the time? But I did spare a half an hour there, which is the topic I'm getting to watch the last half an hour of the England game, which it's terrible really to feel such joy at other people's misery, but it's pretty hilarious to watch the England football team. It's not even the team though. I was thinking about this in the car on the way up here to record. The players are all incredible players. There's many of them that I admire for different reasons in terms of their approach to their performance, their approach to how they hold themselves. Like Jude Bellingham is what a young man he is. But it's everything that surrounds the England football team just sets them up for failure. Like, I think Gareth Southgate is really clued in, but I think he has so much pressures from outside in terms of the media and the fans that it's such a difficult job to get decisions right. And the major thing about English football and everything that goes with the English football team is why it's so funny to the outsiders looking in is every single tournament this is it. It's between us and France is the talk this time round. Maybe they will still go on and win it. Who knows? But it's just the sheer certainty that they're going to be at the top table and they're going to be going and winning the tournament. You've other fantastic teams there that don't think that way. France are probably the only team that would be booed if they didn't get to a final. They're booing in the group stages. Now, granted, it's a 1-1 draw with Denmark and there's a lot expected of this English team, but there's so many things wrong with what goes on. Like, the media hype them up so much. The players are phenomenal, but the players are definitely overhyped. Now, they are fantastic players, world class, but they're still at the same time overrated by their media and by their fans. It's like they're the best players ever. Like, there's talk that Harry Kane is England's best ever player, which is just like an outrageous statement without the success there yet. Now, maybe you don't have to have the trophy as the success to be, I suppose, appreciated as one of England's best. But to say that he is the best ever player is just an outlandish statement. I listened to Gary Neville and Wayne Rooney on Gary Neville's podcast during the week, and they had a load of fans on, and the majority of the room, now granted it's all English fans that are there, but the vast majority of the room picked England to go win it. And that says something. Then if you look at the way the team is set up, it just seems like Groundhog Day, because the problem for that golden generation of the 2000s, and this is what this had me thinking about, the problem was that they tried to fit these fantastic players onto the pitch, but they didn't really have a system for play. Okay? This time around, in the last couple of tournaments, they've had somewhat of a system. They have an abundance of riches in terms of players, for sure. They are great players. But they're trying to fit, like, square pegs into round holes. Like, why are they putting Trent in the middle when he's not a midfielder? And then the punditry is all, oh, well, he shouldn't be playing there. He's a little bit green in that position. He doesn't know in terms of where he should be at certain times. He's not that aware of his surroundings. He definitely would be more comfortable in the back, but he can't defend, so we can't put him there. Don't put him on the field then. It's simple as that. Like, I think that other teams get it so right, and other nations, in that they don't let the media and the fans dictate who plays and who doesn't. They have a system and they work to the system. And if a player doesn't fit into the system, then sorry, mate, you're not going to be playing. But look, I just wanted to talk about that because it's recent, and I know Amy is editing this, and Amy's actually English. So Amy, if you are a football fan, I'm sorry, but I couldn't hide my joy. And I was thinking about why it is that you do get joy as an Irish person watching England fail. And it's because it's always Ireland and whoever's playing against England that you support. That's what you're taught the whole way up. And then simultaneously in being indoctrinated into that and taught that, I suppose you consistently see them fail throughout the years, and you consistently see them become overhyped, and you consistently see them just be dejected as a result of being too overconfident. And it happens in rugby, it happens in soccer as well. And I know it's an irrational thought to because the English football team has nothing to do with what occurred in Ireland years ago, but it's just almost the done thing in Ireland that that's the way you're brought up. And I know my majority of the people that listen to this are Irish, but there are some English listeners and there are some stateside and Australian listeners as well. So I just thought I'd try to explain that because that's what's going on. And the funny thing is, I have this joy, but Ireland aren't even in the tournament because our own football teams is a total shambles at the moment. But it doesn't matter as long as England aren't winning. It's not like they even lost, they drew, but they're booed off the field by their own fans, so it's like a loss because they think they're going to go so well. Whereas if Ireland drew with Denmark, we would be cheering the players off, we'd be giving them a standing ovation, but it's just different levels to the game, I suppose. But anyway, just to gloss over that, the rest of my day was in-person coaching. I did a great session with Gary O'Daly, Gaz's Gaelic guide, who came down. Really strong athlete, some really interesting things there observing, and it got me thinking on the way out here as well. I know everybody's going to be thinking, Jesus, Peter does a lot of thinking. I do. I never stop thinking, sometimes to my detriment. Creating more force or being able to create more force is undoubtedly a good thing. But a lot of athletes, especially in the GAA and in rugby, chase that stick far too much to get faster. They chase the max output stick to such a degree that it takes up the majority of their training time and their physical preparation. They neglect other aspects of training, such as mobility, such as strength at specific joints, such as finding specific positions, such as reactivity, such as being able to move in and out of specific positions, being fluid in your movement rather than being very rigid. And as a result of that, sometimes they struggle to get faster. And it's always good to have an external perspective to come in and have a look at what you're doing. And then it got me thinking about what I've been putting out on social media. And that is in relation to the sessions that I do in person. And people would probably think that I do very specific exercises and that would make up everything that's in my programming for speed, and that is not true whatsoever. The reason that a lot of the movement-based stuff, the reactivity focused stuff, the switching and the mobility takes part of the preparatory work for the sprint work when players come in for in-person sessions with me, is because the vast majority of players and athletes, the strength side of the continuum, the power side of the continuum, with the traditional focus of training, is often taken care of. They often have a lack of exposure to the other training modalities that I would practice a lot in those in-person sessions. So it doesn't really make sense for me, if I'm only going to see them once every 4 weeks, or maybe once definitively, that's it, to go chasing max strength and traditional training stimuli when that's what they get a lot of in their own training, and that's probably what they're most competent at because they've done so much of it. So therefore, it makes much more sense for me to give them a little bit of, well, a lot of what they're not so good at and what they don't have exposure to. And then as a result of that, everything that we do in that session, they then get to go and implement in their own sessions or prior to their own sessions thereafter. Now, that's not to say, as I outlined today to Gary, that they will perform all of the exercises that we do in that session before every session that they do, every speed session or change of direction session. They will mix and match and pick certain variations and then do some of them as preparation for a given session. They might do that for a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and then they'll pick the progression that I've given them, and they will progress to that for another couple of weeks or 2 or 3 weeks, and they'll add variation in based on the other exercises that I've given them that are slightly similar, I guess. Then in relation to the amount of time it takes, people would think that it's going to take ages to do all those exercises, but something that I've learned is I would have previously thought that you had to do at least 3 sets of an exercise to take effect. And I think that's just because that's what you're taught in university. That's what you're taught in all your courses. You very rarely see 1 or 2 sets in there. It'll always be 3 sets plus. Whereas if you're doing all this movement-based stuff, because you have such a lack of exposure and lack of training age in relation to it, 1 to 2 sets are probably going to be enough to create a little bit more space and a little bit more mobility within which you can then rep the positions necessary to get faster and get stronger in those positions and in those end ranges. So really you're freeing up more space and freeing up more space to build more strength and more of a foundation, more control, I suppose, and more mobility down the line, which is then going to help you to become faster. Because say you cannot create a great deal of hip separation, then your ability to accelerate your limb through that degree or that range is going to be lower because you've less distance over which to accelerate the limb. If we can create and control a little bit more hip separation, then we have more space within which to accelerate the limb. Therefore, the velocity of the limb and the force that you're applying once you hit the floor is going to be greater. So if you just go out and sprint with the exact same mechanics that you usually do and go with 100% intent, it's going to be better than doing nothing. But it's probably going to lead to a plateau in terms of how fast you're going to get from doing that. And if you're doing that on suboptimal running mechanics, it can lead to more issues, chronic issues, and even acute issues down the line. And I know I've spoken in detail with Dara and with Owen on the backdoor cut around that and around my own experience with that. So therefore, the preparatory session is, or the preparatory part of the session is not the most important part of the session, but it sets us up for higher quality execution in the most important part of the session, which is undoubtedly the pitch-based drill work and the pitch-based maximal exposures. There's a learning effect of all of this stuff as well. So I'm challenging the athlete in terms of their ability to consciously find specific positions so that they can consciously do so and then take that feeling out onto the pitch and then find that position out on the pitch. They're more likely to find it. Now it is conscious at this stage, but then we add constraints, we add stress to the system, and we add a variety of stressors over time and intensity to hopefully make that more non-conscious over time and increase or shift the bandwidth. So the bandwidth being the worst you can execute something and the best you can execute something, shifting that more positively. So then the best you can execute something consciously is going to be better than it was previously. And as a result of pushing and raising the ceiling, the floor also comes up. So the worst execution that you will possibly do under constraints of fatigue, that's also going to be shifted. As a result of shifting that, your performance is hopefully going to improve, but also your risk of injury is going to go down too. So that's the theory behind it. And I think a lot of athletes miss that. They think the fancy stuff is exactly what they need. What they need to do is some of what they're doing already, and then some of, I don't like call it fancy stuff because it's not really that fancy, but some of the remedial level movement stuff that I would work on with them, I think they get a lot out of because they have a lower training age and they haven't been exposed to it at all. So just some thoughts on that. I had that session with Gary, then I moved into some programming. I had a lot of programming today. Majority were rehab and return to play. What am I seeing a lot of at the moment? I'm seeing, as per usual at this stage of the season, a lot of hamstring issues. And I'm talking to my athletes that I'm working with in regards to those hamstring issues, and the running volumes and the progression from GAA teams and coaches is just it's still ludicrous in some senses. Like, it's still not thought out, not measured. Even when there is GPS, sometimes the coaches are chasing like maximum distance covered and trying to drive the distance metric up. That's what they're using as their, I suppose, tool to assess how fit the players are. It's probably the least important of the lot, realistically. And as a result of this, there are huge spikes. There's no graded progression, and athletes are succumbing to the issues in regards to that volume and in regards to that irrational approach to training. Potentially because they may move in some suboptimal way, but mainly just because it's a load issue. Like, their load management is completely off the chain. Now, some athletes are going to be more predisposed to injury than others if they have previous injury or if they move poorly. But all of the athletes, if there's spikes in volume and there's zero load management, they're all going to be at more risk of injury. So we still have a good bit to go in regards to educating coaches. And I had a conversation with an athlete yesterday around this and what is the best way to do it. Sure, put out free information like I'm doing here, but I think it only gets you so far, because the people that are interested in this stuff are probably the most progressive anyway. So the ideal scenario is to go in with some sort of county board or with the GAA and go around to different clubs educating the coaches on it. But then I've talked to a lot of inter-county players and coaches, and some inter-county setups do the exact same thing as club setups. There's no appreciation for load management. It's very much we turn up and we figure out what we're going to do on the night of training. I have a little black book and I write out my plan for the training session. I don't show it to the S&C coach. I don't show it to the physios. I don't show it to the players. I have no idea of what I'm going to do at the next session or next week even. But we're just going to do this stuff because this is what went wrong last week, and we're going to do this stuff until we get it right. And that is a recipe for disaster, and it's one of the reasons that our amateur athletes suffer so many injuries, I think, is because we are still very amateur in how we approach the game. Even though we expect the athletes to perform like professional athletes and to tolerate loads and volumes that are greater and exceed that of professional athletes in other sports, I guess. So, yeah, I don't know how we navigate it, but I'm just going to keep trying to do it one day at a time, one person at a time, one conversation at a time, one podcast at a time, and hopefully we can change it in time. In regards to other issues, then they've been ACLs, knees, calves. There's been a few calves as well. And then the usual tendinopathies or chronic issues that athletes are presenting with, which are a little bit harder, more challenging to manage, but not impossible. And then groin issues as well, which a lot of GAA players or hurlers and footballers experience, and camogues as well. Less so, I'd say. It's more of a male-dominated issue, what would have been called osteitis pubis or Gilmore's groin. I definitely deal with more athletes that are male in that regard anyway. And that one is a challenging one, but again, an athlete today messaging me, he's getting back to full involvement in training, completely pain-free, which is phenomenal. You have to learn through trial and error with that as well, though. You need to push sometimes a little bit too far so that you realize, okay, that is too much, and then pull the athlete in question back, and then unfortunately that might slow that athlete's progress, but I think in some instances it accelerates the progress of the athletes that follow that athlete in working with you. In relation to podcast plans, I am going to travel and record an in-person podcast tomorrow, I think. I haven't got confirmation on that yet. The podcast has been challenging, to be honest, to put together. The last 2 episodes were not meant to be solo episodes. I was meant to have 2 guest episodes. One, the guest cancelled the morning of through illness. No fault of the guest at all. Just what happens, I guess. And then the second one, I actually travelled down to Limerick to speak with a phenomenal guest, like top caliber. I was actually nervous again to do a podcast, which I wouldn't usually be anymore. And I brought this microphone that I'm pointing to now, my lapel mic, that is a portable one. There's 2 of those that I have. And I brought these 2 Rode mics as well. And we were recording in a studio that had 2 other mics too. And this is a bit unbelievable, to be honest, but you better believe it because it happened. One of my lapel mics was not working, so we couldn't use the 2 of those. One of my Rode mics was not working, so we couldn't use the 2 of those hooked up to my laptop. And then we couldn't log in to the database or into the software at the place that we were recording because the people that ran the studio were actually all away on holidays. The guy that let us in had no background in it whatsoever. He just said, "Oh, are you here for that? Okay, I'll show you to the room. There you go. Do you know how to work that?" I was like, "I have no login. I don't know how to do this." So we ended up sitting there, having a chat for a couple of hours, but knowing that, look, we can't record this. And the guest was very respectful about it. He said, "Look, this is not your fault. Don't worry about it whatsoever. We'll reschedule for another conversation down the line. But I'd prefer not to record if there's a chance that we don't get the content." And the issue with my lapel mics is one of them, the record light is not coming on. I do not know if it's recording or not. So we didn't take the chance. It may have been recording. The light might be just broken, but I don't know if it was worth the conversation I had was worth travelling down to Limerick, but I don't know if it would have been worth sitting down and moving into podcast space and having that conversation if we didn't know if it was going to work. Podcast plans then. I think I need to take a little bit of a step back from the podcast, to be honest, and from putting pressure on myself to get episodes out weekly. The reason I think I need to take a step back from the weekly episodes of the Petey Performance Podcast is I don't know if the input and the amount of effort that I'm putting into it is worth the output at the moment. Because we have the Backdoor Cut running and I'm doing fantastic conversations over there, fantastic podcasts, creating good podcasts and having great guests on the show, I don't know if it's necessary to continue with guest episodes on the Petey Performance Podcast as well, because last week I actually went away to record 4 episodes. Now, I recorded 3 out of the 4, but I was, at the end of the week, absolutely knackered. I was bollocks. I was so tired, and it was a lot of time you have to set aside, and people don't realize. They think you just sit down and record. There's a lot of setup. There's technical issues like that. There's issues in regards to finding venues. If you're on your own, it's always way more hassle. Even getting down to the studio, a load of people that worked in the facility, they didn't know I was showing up. They had no idea what was going on. We had the conversation with Sarah on Wednesday. Sarah forgot about the podcast. I blame myself for that. I should have texted her that morning to remind her, but I texted her half an hour before and she was actually away somewhere else, and she texted me back, "Oh my God, I completely forgot." She ended up being 90 minutes late through no fault of her own. We were sitting there in Dublin, delighted to record, but it was time that was essentially wasted. There's a lot of barriers to getting it done, and it doesn't just run smoothly like, I just show up and switch it on and that's it. There's planning as well. And I think at some stage you have to make a decision, is all that I'm putting out worth it? Because this podcast goes pretty well. Subscribers are going up. Listens are there. It's probably not at the level that it was towards the end of last year. It's still providing value for the listeners that do listen though, and they're getting a lot out of it. So, and I get a lot out of it as well, as I've spoken about at the start of the podcast. I almost said at the top there. Going pure showbiz over here. So I definitely would not stop doing it completely, but I'm weighing up a couple of options in my head at the moment. The options are, for the duration of the Backdoor Cut podcast, that and those are the only guest episodes that I do. Anything for the Petey Performance Podcast is a solo episode like this. The second option is I reduce the frequency with which I put out the Petey Performance Podcast to maybe 3 a month or one every 2 weeks. I don't know if I want to do that because the listeners obviously enjoy listening to it, and consistency is key with podcasting to build momentum and to continue to build subscribers. And the subscribers are going up and the listens are still there. So I don't know, I'm weighing that up. However, what I am thinking I might do is I might go to still recording weekly episodes or 3 episodes monthly, but one of those episodes I record myself, and then I just put the intro on and I put the outro on, and then I just put it up and make it available to my clients. That's what I'm weighing up at the moment, because I get so much out of podcasting and education and I suppose verbalize my thoughts here that I don't want to reduce the frequency with which I'm doing so that I lose my sharpness for it. But maybe I won't lose my sharpness for it because I'm doing the backdoor cut as well. So this is what's going on in my head all the time over the last couple of weeks. And we didn't know if the backdoor cut was going to keep going and it was going to grow to where it is now, where we're almost at 1,000 subscribers. So I always wanted to have the Petey Performance Podcast in my back pocket as well, so that if that did fall through, I still could fall back on it. But is it necessary for the duration of the Backdoor Cut season, which will run for the duration of the GA season, to keep going with both podcasts? I'm not sure. So that's why I talk about, is the input matching the output? Am I getting as much out of all of the work I'm putting into the podcast as I'm putting in? Or would I be better spent putting more time into other areas of the business rather than doing all the long form content? So that's what I have been thinking. And it's something that I'll probably make a decision on sooner rather than later, by the end of the month, I would say, which the end of the month is coming around. And decision making as an entrepreneur and in business is key. And it's something I've learned over time, is you've got to be extremely decisive. And it's also key in coaching. And it's also key in strength and conditioning coaching, everything. You've got to be pretty decisive and you've got to run and move with your decisions quite quickly. Sport is a fast-paced environment, especially when you're on pitch with athletes and especially when you're working in rehab, because shit happens all the time and you've got to be able to make a decision that is more right than it is wrong and doesn't put people at risk quite quickly. So you get quite good at dealing with pressure in regards to that. And I actually had a conversation around decision making with the but the guest that I went to interview for the failed podcast last week. And it was around decision making, because he does a lot of work with Premier League clubs and other national organizations around decision making. And I was asking around the rehab process and around the process of return to play with athletes, what is the right way of going about things when an athlete is a certain percentage away from you having full confidence that they won't become re-injured, but they want to come back to play. And the coaching staff, the manager, wants to know, are they good to go or are they not? And he said, and he has great experience at World Cups, at Olympics, at the highest level of sport. What you need to do is you need to get everybody in the room, all stakeholders from different areas. So you need the doctor, you need the physio, you need the strength and conditioning coach, you need the team sport coach, skills coach, whatever. And everybody needs to put forward their opinion on the topic. And if you also agree on the topic and agree on your opinions, then it's potential that you're experiencing groupthink and everybody's just being influenced by each other. So then, if that occurs, everybody puts forth their own opinions, but one person or a couple of people out of the group has to put forth an opinion that contradicts the opinion that everybody else has. So then you hear voices saying different reasons for different decisions, or making judgments based on different perspective, let's say. So it's not actually important that the person that is putting forward the perspective believes the perspective. It's that everybody in the room hears the perspective, so they weigh up the options. Then off the back of that, everybody has to or should put a number or a percentage on the likelihood that that person or that athlete becomes re-injured if they participate in match play or in the training or whatever situation it is. Off the back of that, you'll be able to take the percentages and appreciate what the average percentile in the room is for the likelihood that that athlete will become re-injured. Then you present that percentage to the head coach, and the head coach makes a decision based on that percentage. So say that percentage is, there's a 50% chance that the athlete becomes re-injured in this game if you play them. There's a 1 in 2. So the coach can then choose, and the athlete can choose to roll the dice and say, look, you might get injured, you might not, but this is a very important game, so let's just see what happens. That might happen around championship time or at these finals, I suppose, as well. Or they might say, look, it's not worth it at this stage of the tournament. Let's hold you back. And then hopefully if we wait another week, that percentage chance of re-injury will come down. And I thought that was really interesting. And I actually not debated with him, but put forth what I had done in the past, which was I found I was making judgments for the players, I suppose, in relation to were they fit to play, based on my KPIs and my metrics that I have for different injuries that I like to clear, I suppose, in order to have confidence that they're not going to become injured in the game, because we're replicating the movement requirements of the game or the worst case scenarios of the game. However, sometimes you won't get to that stage, but the manager will want the player to play. So they'll ask you, is that player good to go? And I would say to the manager, you can play them, but I don't think they're ready to play. I think there's a chance they'll get injured. And typically what I said to this person in question was that most of the time the coaches then would say, fuck you, Peter. Fair enough. Okay, we won't play them. Whereas what he said, you have the right idea in that you're leaving them make the ultimate decision, but to make it fairer, you should be putting a percentage on the chance. You should be hanging your hat on a number. And it doesn't matter if that number is perfect. It's your estimation of the chance that they'll become re-injured. And this particular person in question has done a lot of work in regards to decision making, and also in regards to competency and gurus, and how often we appreciate and think that at the highest level, I suppose, or the gurus think that they have a much greater understanding of what is going on, and much greater control of what's going on than others. They think they're always right, essentially, and they're never wrong. And they have a pretty big ego, and they have a innate talent for blocking out information that doesn't agree or doesn't align with what they believe of themselves. So we all often, well, at least when you get more certain about what you're doing and more certain and more confident, oftentimes it's not because your competency is increasing a lot. It's because you're believing the hype, essentially. You're thinking you can do no wrong. And that's why doubt in rehab and doubt in speed and doubt in coaching is a good thing. But only so much doubt. You have to have some sort of confidence that what you're seeing, and it's why I always use this terminology, I suppose, is more right than wrong. So you have an idea of what you're seeing. It may not be right, but it's probably, based on your experience in the past, more right than wrong. So you give your estimation to the coach, put a percentage on it, and then they can make a judgment based off of that fact. I thought that was really interesting. I thought it was something that I'd bring to you guys, and something that's thought-provoking. If that is thought-provoking for you guys that are still working in sport with teams and whatnot, maybe try it, because I know that there's so many athletes returning to play and suffering injury at the moment. These conversations are happening up and down the country with coaching staff. So I think it's worth trialing. I haven't had a chance to trial it yet, although I will be trialing it with Alice, who works with a number of my athletes in terms of, she works as a physio, and then I work in the return to play stage, strength and conditioning side of the rehab to performance spectrum. We often, and Alex Hassett as well, shout out Alex, we've been working with a client as well. we often agree, all of us. So I'm going to try this now, and I'm going to try to disagree with whatever is being said in regards to return to play. That being said, we sometimes do disagree as well. Sometimes they would say I'm too conservative with my return to play approach, and sometimes I would say they're being quite conservative as well, and we have to let the athlete run, I suppose, and give them a little bit of leash and see how they go. So I'm definitely going to be trying it in the future. That's pretty much it. That's the full update. So episode 150. It's probably appropriate that it has been just another rambling of my thoughts in multiple different areas. So I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you did enjoy it, please remember to like it, share it, and send it.